Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first ever folk filmmaking podcast. It is Joel Dick, and
Dan Lotz here.
we are going to keep you abreast of the current folk filmmaking news. And because this is the first one, it'd probably be a good time to talk about our journey as filmmakers, where we've been, where we are now.
And why we stopped making movies together.
Let's get into it.
So, it feels like it's been like an eon since we've done like a proper YouTube video. I can't even really remember the last time we did a YouTube video together, like just a YouTube video. Like, you know, films, we've done films here and there, you know, making projects, but I think it was when we made the 12 features, we did like an update video, and there's one of us sitting in my old apartment, and it's just me and you talking. I think that was the last one. It was a couple of years ago.
Oh, okay.
Maybe just update people like what you've been doing, and then we'll kind of go into some film stuff.
Well, this is the first thing. I mean, we're both sort of Chicagoland based.
Yeah.
We've been making films since how long? Since we were, around like 10, 12? Like,
yeah, something like that.
Maybe 10 years, maybe like 11 years, maybe 12 years, maybe 15 years.
Yeah.
A long time. Man, we met at Speech and Debate.
Yep.
We learned how to be, sort of use our rhetorical skills. And then from there, it just went crazy.
Yeah.
Where, we started out doing short films. And I was in school. I was taking film school at DePaul University. And you were writing a bunch of scripts.
Yep, I was writing. I had a big 12 scripts and 12 months project.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was kind of the genesis of this YouTube channel.
And a lot of our projects. Long Con came from there.
Yeah.
Was Cinephile one of those 12 scripts?
It wasn't, but it was born from that same era of
Pull the Trigger definitely was from one of those scripts.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Okay, so a lot of our early work came from there, and it's tough, being any YouTube channel. At the beginning, it was just we knew we wanted to do films, we wanted to do filmmaking, and we both wanted to do it together, and so we just did projects, and then we ended up doing our first feature film, which was that first released one? Is that Chlorine?
Yeah,
Is that our first released feature film?
Chlorine was the first release, then it was Sheep Theater, and then it was Long Con. But Long Con was the first that we made. And then after that, it was like a flurry of films. I mean, now officially between films that we have directed and films that we have been in or have been connected to, we're approaching, I believe Chlorine Kills should be number 30. 30 feature films.
That's insane. To think that we've done 30 collectively is sort of insane, because we do Chlorine. Austin McConnell shouts out our film because we sort of did it for one of his videos, and as soon as we release it, the pandemic happens. Because that's I think where we sort of have to start, because the reason why we sort of stopped was because we had a lot of momentum. We were doing short films. We decided to do a proof of concept short film, and then Dan says, "Screw it, let's just do a feature film." And because I think. Which was a new thing on YouTube. There were people doing it, but it was relatively sort of a market breaking. We were breaking the YouTube market for feature length films, and a lot of people would say that, it's not. A lot of the films aren't features because they're not long enough. I think at this point we need to define what a folk film is. If we're talking the folk filmmaking podcast, I think that's be something that you know. As the father, as the quote-unquote
Godfather of folk filmmaking, whatever that means. But basically, I think there were people who posted movies on YouTube before. Shout out to guys like Knives Monroe, who, with his film Her Doppelganger was one of the first movies that I ever saw on YouTube. And I remember thinking, wow, that's a revolutionary concept. But then it kind of dropped off. And there really wasn't anyone making stuff on there. And then I was talking to a guy, Joel Haver, and, we were talking about movie stuff, and he was posting stuff on Vimeo, and I had a good friend, Cody Clark, who was posting stuff on Amazon. And when Chlorine came out, it was kind of like, I feel like, I don't want to say it was the first movie on YouTube because it really wasn't, but it was like the first one on YouTube that I felt like had some traction. Because I feel like most people weren't posting their feature films to get views on YouTube. They were just kind of posting it because they're like, oh, I have nowhere else to go. And they weren't really building like a community around it. Folk filmmaking kind of started when I started to realize after posting that, during the pandemic, that's when things started to blow up. Joel Haver started posting on YouTube. Cody Clark started posting on YouTube. All these people were putting their feature films, Doom Productions, RC Films. They all started collectively, you know, I don't think it was all directly because of us. It was just kind of people independently coming to these ideas.
So you'd say folk filmmaking is basically just YouTube as the place to put your film, the home of your film. Because before that, you can't really make a lot of money if you got to either, you know, have theatrical releases or go on other streaming platforms that actually pay for films.
Well, and I think that one thing that really defined it was people putting out movies on YouTube, but people have done that forever with shorts, but it was defining it to be like a longer film, like a feature-length movie, you know, like typically 70, 80, 90 minutes long, but I think over the years that we have seen folk filmmaking, they've gotten shorter, but they're still what I call longer short films, like 45 minutes or 50 minutes long, you know, still qualifying as a feature film in a technical sense, but not as long as what you would see in Hollywood. It's not going to be a grand 2-hour epic. You know, obviously there are some amazing folk films, you know, like Little Black Submarines or The Mentor, both in the Chlorine universe. We could talk about that a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
But basically, you know, there's a lot of good films out there, and there are ones that are, like I said, 2-3 hours long, and there are some that are, you know, really short ones. I know myself personally, the type of movies that I've enjoyed making have been the shorter ones too. And I like making the long ones. I'm making a film called Chlorine Kills, which is like almost 2 hours. And I've made films that have, you know, barely cracked 40 minutes. So I think that's kind of like the rough definition of what a folk film is.
Yeah, I'd say in the simplest form, free feature-length films is, I think, the big thing. Because you have Tubi, which I would still call, you can still call that folk filmmaking because the whole point is there's no paywall. You don't have to have a subscription in order to watch the film. And that's an experiment right now.
Yeah.
Just as Fortnite was an experiment when it was like they released the beta version of it and just allowed people to play for free. This is sort of the same idea is, sure, you can try to get it on Netflix and like, you know, hope that someone says it's good enough to get on, or you can just find an audience on YouTube and allow them to watch your content for free and build an audience that way. So I'd say that's probably the best way to define it.
And then that kind of defined, if we're going to go into a little bit about us, like that defined our career for the last, it's silly to almost say a career because it feels like it hasn't been a lot of time, but then the more I think about it, it's like we've been doing YouTube, you know, in a more serious sense since 2019.
Yeah.
So it's been almost 6 years, almost a decade of life on a platform of doing films. And it has spanned, you know, 30 movies now, like we've worked on. And that's crazy to me. And I think like throughout that time period, you know, we experimented with the folk filmmaking, you know, idea of like what kind of movies you could make. I mean, we could talk about some of them. I mean, I know you had experience making a film, Hell is a Timeshare in Florida. Mm-hmm. I had experience making, you know, Chlorine and, you know, Ramen Sucker Punch and a whole host of films. I think it would be interesting to explain, you know, where we were and then, you know, where we kind of ended up and how we kind of took a hiatus and then where we went from there.
Yeah, because I just wanted to, before, because this is going to be called the Folk Filmmaking Podcast, we sort of got to talk about what a folk film is and sort of what our purpose is as filmmakers and why YouTube. Why do we choose YouTube over other platforms? So, yes, first feature film we put online, Chlorine, Austin McConnell shouts it out, you know, get a decent amount of hits from that. And then immediately, as soon as it's released, the pandemic happens, which, you know, on first glance, we're like, okay, everyone's at home. Maybe this is a good golden opportunity to find an audience. But at the same time, you know, we're both trying to make the channel work. We're both trying to get videos out. You know, you decided to make cheap theater during that time. Yeah. And people just didn't know what was going on. So it was hard to, like, work together if you will. If we had an established and had a bigger audience, maybe we would have done a lot of things like over Zoom where we would talk about content.
Yeah.
But
I think it was so in the infancy of it. Like Zoom wasn't even a thing until like mid-pandemic, really. Like,
True.
Like we think about it, and it's like
more like Skype, right?
Yeah,
Skype was the thing.
Skype was still the thing. Zoom like didn't really hit until midway through the pandemic, and then I think like that was kind of like the first try that we did at it. We went through the pandemic. I made cheap theater. I mean, you helped out.
But there definitely was a schism just between you and me, just because we weren't as excited to always just get together and make stuff because
there really wasn't any way to do it.
The pandemic, everything ground to a halt. If you were working in any industry that got undercut, you were lost. There was nothing else to do, or move back in with your parents.
Yeah.
So that slowed everything down. It was a difficult time. It was great because you could really find an audience because everyone was inside their houses just watching content, right? But at the same time, in order to find that audience, you need to keep making things.
Stuff, yeah.
And we've always sort of thrived when we all get together every once in a while and then make, on a consistent basis and make stuff. And it's not like you didn't make cheap theater, we didn't make other projects, but it definitely slowed down. That definitely took a hit. And it was sucked because there was a lot of momentum that we had with our first feature film.
Yeah.
So you make cheap theater. The pandemic happens. Finally, things start opening back up. And then we're like, okay, we lost all this time. It's time to do something big and bold. What is something that not a lot of filmmakers do?
Yeah. What
should we tackle? Dan, what was the great idea?
So we quickly wrapped up, and by quickly I mean it took us 4 years to finish our debut feature, which was our third feature that came out, which is called Long Con.
Yeah.
We wrapped that, and I think it was kind of this weird moment where we kind of finished it, and I don't know your perception of it, but I don't think either of us was very happy with how it like the distribution for how much work and time and effort we put into it. It hit, but it didn't hit as big as Chlorine did. I think we had this expectation that Chlorine hit, like maybe Long Con's going to be like the next big one. And it didn't have, Sheep Theater did decent, and Long Con did better than that, but it didn't hit the same heights. So I think we were like, okay, we got to try a new project to get people interested, and that was the 12 features.
Yeah.
So which was like, hey, instead of like over-laboring on one feature, let's just do a bunch of like little ones and make a bunch of different creative projects, and then we kind of jumped into that.
Yeah, and I think if we're thinking of why would you do something like that? It's just the idea of if you want to be the best potter, you're just going to keep making. You just got to keep making a bunch of pots until you get really good at it.
Yeah.
And there's a big debate of quantity versus quality.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the best way to get good at something is just to continue to keep doing it and refining your process.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the idea. And what's great about YouTube and the folk filmmaking movement is that there's not that big of a barrier to entry. There's nothing really forcing you to do something a very specific way. You can have a movie that is 41 minutes, it's technically feature length, and it could be about anything. It can be shot on a GoPro, it can be shot on an iPhone. And I think that freedom is something that is an experiment now.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're trying to tap into. So we do the 12 features, and man, a lot of things happen. We're doing the 12 features, but we also wanted to make 2 sequels to our original, the first published feature film, Chlorine.
So it was ultimately 14 movies.
So it was going to be 14. So we really went for everything. We tried to shoot the moon with doing that. And I feel like that was after the pandemic, and then we basically tried to force our rebound. And then I think the beginning of where we started to stop doing stuff was the burnout from that 12 features project.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if I'm being honest, I think it's hard when you're in the moment, but like to see it like in retrospect, it kind of was like the beginning of the end of the golden era kind of for us. It was kind of like we did so many projects, and it was accentuated by, I remember when we filmed the last movie, Paul's Garden, and there was a part when we finished it, and I remember going, Joel, we're done, and you went, okay, and you shoved your your shovel into the ground. You're like, well, yeah, it's great. And I remember thinking like, oh man, we're burned out. And I think it was hard because like that was a project where we did a lot of stuff, and then on top of that, we had to edit all those. Like I was editing all these movies.
And shock, surprise, they're not all done, and mostly because of me. But
yeah, I mean, we did pretty good. We got 10 out of the 12 edited.
10 out of the 12 I think are done. We have the folk
filmmakers documentary,
and then 2 cameras, one day in Chicago, which is more of an experimental, just like look at my documentary about my new camera and sort of just testing it out.
Yeah.
And the nearby city of Chicago. Yeah. So we get burned out, and not to mention some personal problems going on in your life, Dan.
Yeah.
And then with me, I got really sick during the production of Chlorine Kills.
Yeah.
And basically spent a whole month flying down to my family in Florida.
Yeah.
And just like recuperating.
Yeah. I mean,
while you made Picking Up the Pieces.
Yeah. So that was one of the last 12 features. I made that one, and then you were recouping, and then I was thinking like, oh crap, we're not going to even be able to finish 12 features because you were out for the count midway through, and I was like, I wasn't so sure. We were getting kind of close to the end of it.
So needless to say, we tried this crazy idea, this crazy big 12 features project, and there was just a lot of personal issues between us that really made the whole project difficult. And somehow we still did it. Somehow we still produced at least the 12 features in 12 months. But then things just
went off the rails. Would be the best way to describe it.
You think life calms down, and you think, okay, you take a breath of fresh air. You're like, wow, we're done producing it. We can slow down a little bit, and then just life isn't that simple.
Yeah, I mean, I went through. I've talked about it on the channel a little bit about my dad passing away, and then it was like 12 features wrapped up. Mm-hmm. Chlorine Kills, we were just kind of getting closer to finishing stuff, and my dad's really involved in the movie. My dad passed away really tragically. You can look throughout the channel if you want to see even more details about it, but I won't go into it here.
And Chlorine Kills is centered around your dad, and also for a lot of it is sort of like an homage to him and his life and his impact on you. Yeah,
so it's like a movie about him. So then he passes away when I would say we were less than 25% of the way done with his stuff. So then we kind of have to scrap everything that we had had planned for. We had filmed a good amount of the movie, just not with him. So we had filmed percentage with him, and then a percentage with the other cast members, and that percentage was enough to make almost a whole movie with all of it together. And I think that was I kind of feel like that was the schism moment where it was kind of we had done all these crazy projects, and then it was we only got one left, and then this thing that happens that's irreversible that makes it so then now, instead of us being really close to finishing the movie and being we only got 50% left to shoot with my dad and we're done, it's now oh great, that whole movie we worked on is screwed, and we really have no way to dig ourselves out of it. And then obviously we did dig ourselves out of it, but it was a ton more shooting, and I think that was kind of the beginning of us kind of doing stuff and parting ways a little bit for creative projects. And then I started doing a bunch of little short feature things. I finished some of the ones that were from the past, from Sheepland.
Sheepland finally got done.
I finished within a single second.
Yep.
I finished what was the one we did with Zach?
Goody Two Shoes.
Goody Two Shoes.
You remade Watch Me As I Go. You made a sequel to So in the same time. So definitely a lot of it was me not having the motivation, really getting burned out from 12 features, and but I mean, let's be honest. I'm definitely more of the cinematographer and sort of a cultivator of sort of the ideas, whereas Dan really does come up with majority of the film ideas, and we've both worked on that.
Yeah.
But I can definitely say that that was one thing that I struggled to like. It's tough because throughout the whole channel, we knew we wanted to do filmmaking things, and after Chlorine came out, even before then, we were doing like sort of like a film school. I think that's another thing that's sort of been tough, because as a YouTuber this doesn't have enough of a following to be successful, you're always wondering what is my niche, what is my thing.
Yeah.
And we knew we wanted to do filmmaking, we knew we loved filmmaking, but doing filmmaking in a way that people want to watch is also very difficult.
Yeah.
Like finding that's a part of being a YouTuber is, okay, I want to make movies or I want to make videos and talk to people about something, but what is that thing and what do people really want?
Well, yeah, and I think it does make me think of one of our only successes, like big successes besides Chlorine, which is Split Screen.
Yep.
Which has gained a cult following. I'd say, like, kind of similar to Chlorine was like which is funny because after we did this like really laborious 12 features project, we do the Oscar movie, and it's literally one of the most, I would hate to say least effort, like, but it was a quick little horror found footage thing, and it found like its own audience, and it does rival like what we had with Chlorine.
It's a tough pill to swallow that the projects that you work the most on
usually don't
necessarily.
Yeah.
And I watched a video recently of Mr. Beast, and he said that if I did a video where I gave away $1 million and I did a video where I gave away $100,000, it wouldn't affect the views.
Yeah.
And I sat there and thought about it. I was like, wow, that must be like horrible to think about.
Yeah.
Like you can't just put more money and just get an instant result.
Yeah.
And unfortunately with art and with YouTube, there is a randomness there. And I think that struggle is, how do we keep doing things when there's no like proven record? And do we really like the purely instructional, hey guys, this is how you shoot, this is how you compose a frame? There's enough of that content on YouTube, online that you can get anywhere else.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of projects that we do, but just because you do projects doesn't mean there's an audience every time. We do horror films, we do dramas, we do comedies. One of our most successful short films was a very simple 30-second skit, and it blows up.
Well, and I think like it's one thing that like the channel people like never really see is like the brainstorming behind all of it, like us brainstorming like, what are we gonna do? Like, what do people like and what do people don't like? And it's so easy to and you've seen me stress out over it for the last 7 years of like figuring out like what is the content. And I think the best way to sort of, I don't know if we're totally towards the end of this video yet, but like in terms of leaving off, like is like where do we want to go from where we are? Because I think like, that is one thing that really interests me is like where do we see the channel going? Because I have like things that I want to do, and I think there are things that you want to do, and I think one thing we realized with the burnout is like there has to be a marriage of those two things.
Yeah.
Like, ultimately, it can't just be what Dan wants to do, and it can't just be what Joel wants to do. What is that? What are you thinking about bringing towards the channel?
And that's the tough thing, because I never even considered truly making a feature film. Was never on my radar until Dan was really, made the 12 feature length scripts.
Yeah.
And that was something that I never even considered. What I love about short films is that you can just shoot it in a short period of time, put a lot of effort in, and I think that YouTube in general, the viewers like the shorter clips. Now that doesn't mean you can't do the feature length stuff, but that's the tough thing about being a successful YouTuber, right? How do I do something that I like to do and want to do? It's going to keep me motivated to keep doing it, and there's going to be an audience for. And we want to hear from you. Yeah. What do you think is the right move? And in the future, I think the answer is there's going to be a lot of different things happening. We're definitely going to be doing some short films. We're definitely going to keep doing feature films. I really do want to do more of a podcast style where we talk to other filmmakers, other folk filmmakers specifically in this space that are excited to put out feature-length films and that are really excited about the art of filmmaking, because it's freeing, but at the same time, the possibilities are endless, which is actually tough, right?
Yeah.
There's so much you can do. You can make a movie about anything, any topic, and it's tough. A lot of, if you want professional actors, you got to pay for that. If you want professional sound, you got to pay for that. You got to know how to shoot. You got to have camera equipment. You got to have your own lights. So even though it is exciting to be able to just put something out and not have the barriers to, like, you don't need a distributor, you don't need a film festival, you don't have to make something that's so good that someone has to look at it and watch it and say it's the best thing ever in order to get in somewhere. You don't have to know someone to make a piece of content and get it known by, people online. Yeah. I think that's what the beautiful part of YouTube is, that we can do a lot of different things. And even now, I can't say for sure I know exactly what I want to do, but what I want to keep doing is at least short films. That's something that I think that is something that we can at least test what type of things we want to do, what type of genres we want to focus on. Yeah. And then from there, we can sort of figure out what type of features. Obviously, we'll keep doing features. That's not going to stop either.
And I think, like, for me, like, I've always been the more feature-minded person of the two of us. Yeah. Obviously, that's obvious. But I do want to do shorts, too. I think, like, my ideal would be a mixture of both. Like, some weeks we do a feature, some weeks we do a short, some weeks, more consistently, I think we were talking about doing, like, a podcast in between these things. I think that's good. I think I really want to do a, like, liminal horror series, like something that's like a more sustained mixture of feature and short, which is like, okay, a consistent set of characters within a consistent series that the shorts are individually consumable, but, they build to a bigger narrative. I think, like, taking what we learned from narrative filmmaking, and making it something that's stretched out for 24 episodes of, 5-minute pieces of content, I think that interests me, like, almost as much as making feature-length movies. Is like, okay, it's the same type of content, it's the same amount, but if we can draw out, a 100-minute film into, 5 20-minute episodes, something like that, I think there's a chance that we could reach an audience that we've never reached before, because, a 20-minute horror film is a lot more consumable than a 52-minute horror film that is only marketing towards people who want to sit down and watch a really big thing. So I think, like, for me, it's not shorts versus features. It's more, how do we make our features, more consumable in the package of a short, is one thing that I'm interested of trying to tackle. Is like, okay, is there a way that this can be episodic rather than it being just one long thing, and how do we engage the viewer? That's interesting to me. So that's, like, where I personally see myself taking the channel, as trying to find a narrative that I'm interested in, that I could do for a decent long period of time, and involves a series of characters. I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, and along with the podcast, I think what I want to focus on is other folk filmmakers, their work. I want to be a lot more analytical, and looking at frame by frame, scene by scene, other people in the folk filmmaking market here on YouTube, and highlighting their work, but also breaking it down. I want to break down. Dan, you've done some video essays. I think that would be awesome to continue doing, because I have a lot of thoughts. But there's a lot of films that come out. There's so many every single year. There's independent and Hollywood films that everyone can learn from, and that I have thought about a lot. And I think I have a lot to talk about. And I think that would be very interesting to a general audience as well. Because I don't think a lot of people know all the folk filmmakers that are out there. And I think that to showcase their work, I think would be a great service, to build the community of filmmakers here on YouTube.
And I think that's maybe the last thing that I wanted to talk about before we wrap this up is, making the channel more folk filmmaking focused. I think when we were at our peak as a channel, it was very much focused on the community rather than on ourselves. And I think there was a point where the community and ourselves came to a distance. And I remember the period of time, it was because there was a lot of drama, there was a lot of, like, infighting between the folk filmmakers that was off screen that I think a lot of people didn't see.
Yeah.
And I think I'm at a point now where it's like, I'm interested in the community again. I'm interested in, us, like, being at the forefront of bringing this community to other people, and just kind of focusing on things like the folk filmmaking playlist. That was cool. That was fun. I think, like, there's so many films that have come out since then that, like, I haven't cataloged all these films.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's any way I could ever do that, like, again, in the sense, like, it's so much work to not get paid for it, like, to, like, go and catalog everyone. But, like, if we could talk about, here's a great film, check it out, on a podcast.
And why it's good, right? Not just say, hey, it's a good film, it's this, and this.
Yeah, not like just, like, shamelessly just promoting it. Like,
we know what makes good films. We're able to sort of point out what's good about certain films, and I think that analysis, I think, would be interesting to watch.
Yeah, that's definitely where I want to go with it. So I think, like, folk filmmaking, being at the forefront of everything we do, I think that's kind of where we're going with it. So
you don't have to look long on YouTube to know how creative the internet is. The internet is one of the most creative places. The amount of voices, the amount of random comments you'll find on videos, that'll be the funniest thing ever.
Yeah.
The internet is, and if anything else proves that, it's those sort of the Joel Haver Oscar challenge, which we do every year, which is just a challenge, which is, instead of watching the Oscars, instead of watching these people that, have all the success in the world, they're just congratulating each other, what can some motivated people with a camera do? And I think that is also a good summation of what we're trying to do with our channel, which is, we're capable of doing really cool stuff, and there's the internet, the folk filmmaking movement is capable of so much more. And we are super excited to sort of show that to the world.
Yeah, so I think this is a great place to end the podcast, but I imagine what we'll be doing next is probably next week. I think we'll do a short or some sort of, narrative project, I'm guessing, within the next couple weeks.
Speak for yourself, Dan.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah, we'll probably do something like that, and we'll probably start getting into a more regular, consistent schedule. I think ideally we had talked about maybe they're doing like 2 videos a week, a podcast and then a narrative every week. Yeah. Easier said than done.
But we want to get back on that train of the more you do, the better you get at something, which is we're trying to just keep that consistent and try to make some, funny or interesting or scary or dramatic skits for everybody to watch and get entertained by.
Yeah, and see where that goes. So if you guys have stayed around, thank you for watching us over the years. Hopefully this was a decent explanation of where we've been and where we're going. And just continue to subscribe, watch our stuff. I would encourage, because this might be the first video you've seen of ours in a while in terms of your subscription feed. I'd encourage you to go through the features we have put out and check out one that you haven't seen already.
Yeah, and if you're continuing to watch our content even through the thin and the thick of it, we just want to say thank you for sticking around and believing in us. And we're going to be putting out some really good stuff in the future, and we would love for you to join us on that journey.
Peace.
Peace.